when I was moving and driving up with my team to the Rafah border crossing, you could see trucks like kilometers upon kilometers of trucks that are just waiting to be let in, and Israel denies these trucks systematically to let in food, water, fuel, medical supplies. Once I got in though, and it was a very lengthy kind of administratively like slow process, and once we finally got into the other side, immediately it feels like another world. And I've had other colleagues describe it as post-apocalyptic. Like parts of Gaza have been completely flattened. There are people who previously lived there go back and walk around and you don't even recognize there's no streets anymore, so there's no landmarks, there's no streets, so it's completely unrecognizable, and it feels like another world, because there's just nothing that I think compares to this kind of level of destruction with warfare that I don't think we've seen before, like so concentrated warfare on such a small piece of land. And when we were finally got to the hospital, the Emirati maternity hospital in central Rafah, where we stayed the first night, um, we were immediately met with so much like gratitude and warmth, despite how little they had. And immediately, what the Palestinian healthcare workers that greeted us, what they did was give us food and water, even though we actually came prepared with our own supply to be self-sufficient. What they wanted to do was share a meal together, because this is how you greet people, how you treat people, with respect and dignity and kindness. But the humanity of these Palestinian healthcare workers to do this when now they have so very little, and they had so very little then as well. Um, it's really an indescribable kind of situation. And I only finished my training in family medicine around 2.5 years ago, but so many others who I've encountered and now worked with and befriended, who have worked in many other conflict and war-torn parts of the world, say that this is like a standalone experience, because I think so many of us have not actually ever worked in a genocide.
Hello, I'm Rachel Gilmore, your least favorite person's least favorite journalist. Welcome to Bubble Pop, the show where we talk about some of the biggest headlines and juiciest news tidbits so you don't have to doom scroll. Today, I am so honored to have primary care physician Yipeng Ge on the show. We're speaking on Tuesday because tomorrow, Yipeng leaves to join people from around the world who are heading towards the Rafah crossing in Egypt to break Israel's siege on Gaza. The goal this time isn't to enter Gaza, but Yipeng has done that before too. He was previously on the ground to provide aid and medical care. He's got more strength of character in his pinky finger than most of our elected officials have taken together. Because of that, I am honored to have Yipeng on the show. Yipeng, welcome to Bubble Pop.
Thank you for having me, Rachel.
Of course, it is genuinely my honor. I am so in awe of your courage, and you're one of very few Canadians who is genuinely a helper, genuinely trying to make this world a little less awful. And people like you, I think, inspire a lot of hope. So I'm really grateful to have you here. Um, could I ask you about what moment did you decide that you wanted to join this march?
Um, yeah, it was pretty recent. It was maybe about like a week and a half ago. I was thinking about what more could I be doing, like from the positionality that I am in, the privileges that I hold, what more could I do? And I remember you covered our May 28th, 2025, like press conference on the Hill. We brought doctors who've recently worked in Gaza back in April, May of this year, to talk about what they've seen. And that's actually not the first time we held a press conference like that. We did one back in November of last year as well, which
Mm.
was very differently received. We had no media present, and this time we had a packed media room. And I think it just really speaks to genocide is over time becomes unavoidable to address. And now we're 20 months into this ongoing genocide in Gaza, where Canada is wholly complicit. And I remember meeting with ministers, members of parliament that afternoon, and I just kept thinking, like, what more can we do? Right? Like we've done these press conferences, we've done petitions, we're still doing petitions, we're doing letters, we're doing direct actions, we're doing marches, protests, and we're doing research to find out which companies are heavily complicit. Or, for example, just over the past few days, we learned that $18.9 million of weapons and technology were approved by Canada for these Canadian companies to send all those things worth that much money to Israel just in the last year alone, even
Wow.
though the foreign affairs minister said we have this quote unquote two-way arms embargo, which in fact, we truly do not.
Mm.
Where, and I remember hearing these things from members of parliament, especially within the Liberal Party, that they were um, kind of following what Global Affairs Canada and Minister of Foreign Affairs had told them, which were actually, in fact, blatant lies this entire time. And so the more that I thought about it, what more can I do? What more can I do? And this global march to Gaza has been mobilizing for weeks on and months now to see it as a reality. And I think it also came at a time when I'm just seeing this most recent freedom flotilla. There's been so many freedom flotillas over the years, unfortunately unsuccessful to actually bring aid directly to Gaza. But I think it's inspiring to see ordinary citizens, people of conscience of the world, do what they can within their power to break the siege and blockade that is um, absolutely necessary to end the famine and the starvation that is like plaguing the entire Gaza Strip as we speak, where we're really seeing the end stages of genocide, of an extermination of an entire peoples, when the restriction on food aid in particular is just so extreme. Where, my own colleagues that I'm in touch with, I don't know, at that press conference I mentioned, I just don't know what to text back to them when they can't feed their children, when they
Yeah.
can't find the food to feed their children. And so this really feels like a pivotal moment for a lot of us to do what we can to bring attention to the Rafah border crossing, where like thousands of trucks still lay at the borders, and Israel denies these trucks from entering. And it really feels like this pivotal moment of like, if we don't get these things in, um, it's just a catastrophic, unbearable situation in Gaza with the extreme loss of life that's already taken place, and and like there's still people to be saved, still people to receive the aid. But if we struggle to kind of really meet this moment where we're at, to really use the power of people, and to effectively organize and show the people of conscience of the world really are against this, against the forced starvation of an entire population, against collective punishment of an entire population, who just deserve to live, and to live with dignity, and to live with um, uh, and to receive humanitarian aid with dignity, which is absolutely what's not happening with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is just set up by the Israelis and the Americans as a continuation of the genocide kind of enablement apparatus, as others have put it. And so I think it's a
Yeah.
culmination of seeing all these things and also thinking, okay, what more can I do? And I've been really grateful to also like work in clinics where I've very like gave them gave them not a lot of notice, but they were really supportive in allowing me to leave my patients here in Canada for a short period of time so that I can do this, and hopefully it does something.
I there might be some people listening, unfortunately, probably quite a few, because I was Googling to read up on this march, and there hasn't been a ton of coverage leading up to it within Canada. So, could you give a general sense to the listeners about like what this looks like, what the goal is, and yeah, just walk us through the march itself?
I mean, the call itself came from the people of Gaza and
Mm,
ordinary citizens around the world who have been listening, have been watching the ongoing and unfolding genocide, took up that call to say, okay, this is something that we can materially do around the world to bring attention to the Rafah border crossing, where aid is sitting on that other side of the border, and all it needs to do is to enter, and that saves thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, if not, over 1 million lives. And um, there were folks in Canada that took up this call, and some of them I know quite well because they're based in Ottawa and they have been very active in other direct actions and organizing around Palestine. And it's a collective effort from a lot of different folks from a lot of different walks of life. And we have, I believe, like almost 100 people coming from across the country in Canada, and we only make up one country delegation. And I believe there's people from 84 different countries around the world. So we're expecting around 4,000 people just from this global march to Gaza alone, because there's also the Sumud land convoy from Tunisia, where we're expecting about
mm,
2,000 people, and they've actually just left Tunisia and are probably crossing into Libya right now. So that they can get into Egypt. And the goal will be to all collectively move together from Egypt to the Egyptian Palestinian border, the Rafah border, over the next few days. And I do think like it's a testament to how um, people are really demanding what more can they do, what can they do to support, and also know that there's a lot of privilege in um, the positions that where we are in. Um, uh, a lot of people from different countries hold certain passports where we're able to do this kind of organizing and activism work. And I think it's really an expression of using that privilege, these things that are afforded to us, so that we can leverage that to be able to bring attention to the ongoing genocide in Gaza. And in fact, it's actually our responsibility to, because that said genocide is only happening because of complicit parties and states like the Canadian government. And so there's a responsibility for us to hold our governments to account.
I'm glad you brought up the complicity of our government because that's something that I've noticed you've really been driving home in the press conferences I've seen you participate in. And I think a lot of Canadians, one thing I've noticed in response to at least my coverage is Canadians will say, oh, well, what do they expect us to do? Like, we're just another country. And could you explain Canada's role and complicity a little bit more? I mean, I know you touched on the
Mhm.
arms that continue to, or the weapons parts that continue to be sold to countries who then sell it to Israel. But could you expand a little bit more about or on Canada's role in this?
Mhm. I mean, I think one of the most basic things that Canada is responsible for is um, sounding the alarm when genocide is possibly taking place in the world, right? Because Canada is a signatory to the Geneva Convention to prevent genocide. It's not even to stop it, it's to prevent it. And yet we see genocide unfolding before our eyes. And Canada has not only failed to prevent it, to do every step that they can within their toolbox, which there are many, including sanctions, including suspending trade, including um, breaking ties with complicit companies that are sending, like putting those arms embargoes in place. Um, and Canada has really done the bare minimum and has just kind of used some language that has actually signaled to, I think, a lot of folks that, oh, Canada is actually not as complicit as the United States. Like that's a lot of the
Mm,
heard from members of parliament, for example, which is extremely disappointing when we have groups like World Beyond War, for example, that have done the heavy lifting of doing this research as to what is truly happening with arms trade. And so I think it's really important for me to clarify that, Minister for Foreign Affairs Melanie Joly last year, when she was in that role, said Canada had an arms embargo in place now, which is in fact not true. What they did was pause new permits for weapons technologies to Israel and suspend 30 or so permits, which only makes up a very like small fraction of the permits that allow technologies and weapons and whatever go to Israel from Canada. So around 88% of those existing permits are still in place. And we can see that with the recent filings that were reported on just a few days ago, that last year it was $18.9 million worth of technologies, that were sent from Canadian companies to Israel, even though um, Israel is being taken to the highest levels of court for genocide by South Africa. And Canada hasn't done nearly enough to impose sanctions, to suspend free trade, to suspend these weapons technologies from going. I think a really clear example for me is living in Ottawa. There's a company called Gas Stops that produces the engine sensors, and they're the sole manufacturing company for these engine sensors, by the way. And these engine sensors go to the U.S. and go into the F-35 fighter jets built by Lockheed Martin. And these fighter jets are really expensive to make, and they're made on contract. So they're made as they're used and needed, and they're sent over to Israel from the US with Canadian parts. And then they get flown over Gaza by the Israeli military to drop the 2,000-pound bombs that are killing families, women, children, men. And and to see those injuries, to see the impacts of those things in the hospitals, in the clinics, we have Canadian doctors who have documented
yeah.
that experience of caring for those patients. And so it becomes an obligation for not only us Canadian doctors that have been there, but truly anyone who has eyes that can see what's happening, that has a heart for understanding like our responsibility to end these kinds of forms of complicity, to be able to pressure our Canadian government to end these kinds of transfers, to also put that diplomatic and political pressure on Israel, because when that pressure gets put on Israel, they do step back, and we've seen it historically over the years, in the same ways that like if U.S. Were to put any bit of pressure on Israel, they comply, because Israel is this settler colony that is propped up by the West, like the U.S., Canada, the U.K., and so these forms of complicity were also not made overnight. They've been made over decades. But when things are so clear and are so horrible and so deplorable in this situation, um, you you would expect that the policies will shift to protect human life, and unfortunately, that's still not what we've seen with the Canadian government. And the last thing I'll just like I think highlight for everyday folks in Canada is like these are our taxpayer dollars as well that help subsidize these kinds of transfers of weapons technology. These things happen in our backyards, where just a few weeks ago, CanSec took place in Ottawa, which is this national arms and war technology trade show with many companies also based in Israel, for example, that sell and buy other weapons technologies. And the technologies that they sell are field tested on Palestinians in Gaza. And they're sold to other buyers and they are sold to governments. And we had our new Minister of Defense, David McGuinty, who used to be my member of parliament when I lived in Ottawa South, like go to that conference, that trade show, that weapons trade show, and say, "Oh, we're actually going to increase our military spending and support more of you guys, these companies, some of which are so heavily complicit and directly involved in the genocide." And so I think there are a lot of Canadians who are also bearing witness to what's happening in Gaza and who know that genocide obviously is wrong, um, are saying not on our watch, right? And are protesting, are writing their letters, are organizing in a lot of different important ways, or supporting boycott, divestment, sanctions, movements, calls to action, so we can build the people power necessary to end Canadian complicity.
Yeah. It's so it's kind of incredible how you're running through a lot of the questions I had for you, because I think you've just gotten so good at communicating to people like how they can help, how they can get involved, what the different roles are. So I really appreciate that. I I I did want to ask you, you mentioned the healthcare workers on the ground in Gaza, that we have Canadian healthcare workers who have provided testimony about what they've seen, and you are one of those doctors. You have been there. You have borne witness to the genocide. And I guess the first thing I wanted to ask you about that, if you're comfortable sharing, was, could you just tell me about entering Gaza the first time? What was that process like? What did you see? What did you smell? What interactions did you have? What was that entry like?
Um, I think it's important to mention, right? Like to enter Gaza, and I entered Gaza through the Rafah border crossing, which is between Egypt and Palestine. But Israel still controls that flow.
Yeah.
Even then, when I entered, and now what they did is occupied and destroyed the Palestinian side of the Rafah border crossing. When I was moving and driving up with my team to the Rafah border crossing, you could see trucks like kilometers upon kilometers of trucks that are just waiting to be let in, and Israel denies these trucks systematically to let in food, water, fuel, medical supplies. Once I got in though, and it was a very lengthy kind of administratively like slow process, and once we finally got into the other side, immediately it feels like another world, and I've had other colleagues describe it as post-apocalyptic. Like parts of Gaza have been completely flattened. There are people who previously lived there go back and walk around and you don't even recognize there's no streets anymore, so there's no landmarks, there's no streets, so it's completely unrecognizable, and it feels like another world, because there's just nothing that I think compares to this kind of level of destruction with warfare that I don't think we've seen before, like so concentrated warfare on such a small piece of land. And when we were finally got to the hospital, the Emirati Maternity Hospital in Central Rafah, where we stayed the first night, um, we were immediately met with so much like gratitude and warmth, despite how little they had. And immediately, what the Palestinian healthcare workers that greeted us, what they did was give us food and water, even though we actually came prepared with our own supply to be self-sufficient. What they wanted to do was share a meal together, because this is how you greet people, how you treat people, with respect and dignity and kindness. But the humanity of these Palestinian healthcare workers to do this when now they have so very little, and they had so very little then as well. Um, it's really an indescribable kind of situation, and I only finished my training in family medicine around 2.5 years ago. But so many others who I've encountered and now worked with and befriended, who have worked in many other conflict and war-torn parts of the world, say that this is like a standalone experience, because I think so many of us have not actually ever worked in a genocide. It's truly on like is incomparable to a lot of other things that are happening in this world because of the concentration of bombardments, but also that existing blockade that pre-existed the past few months, pre-existed um, October 2023, and was in place since 2007. And so I remember meeting children who I thought were a much younger age than what they truly were, but they were stunted from their growth because of the caloric limitations on caloric intake, based off of the limitations of aid that were being let in, which was an Israeli policy that later came to light that's what was happening. And so um,
And this was prior to the full blockade, correct?
that was, I believe, that was like part of the blockade, part of the
Okay.
2007 onwards blockade.
Right. So,
Mhm.
but it was before this one that everyone's so focused on
Yes,
from,
this
the
this
total.
blockade, I believe, has been since March of this year, and
Mm,
has also just absolutely like like so very little has entered. I think
yeah.
almost nothing entered, and then maybe about a week and a half ago, I think a few trucks entered, which is like absolutely nothing compared to what
Yeah.
the entire population needs, and and it entered in this way where it was being delivered by um, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which
Yes.
is operated by Americans and Israelis, and actually American mercenaries, and they deliver aid in such an undignified way
Yeah.
for people to just because people are desperate, people are starving, to just to fight over this little amount of aid, and and then you have a degree of uh, complete civil breakdown, which has happened because Israel has destroyed all these different facets of life and civil infrastructure and targeted um, the people that keep some degree of order also in the Gaza Strip.
Mm.
And so by them doing this, they've also manufactured and created this issue of improper aid distribution, and they've also shot and fired into the crowd. And
Yeah.
actually, it's been targeted because we've had accounts from doctors that the patients that they receive are shot in the chest and shot in the head, and so these are kill shots. They are meant to kill, and I
On civilians.
and on civilians, on civilians that are grabbing food aid for their families. And there are ways to deliver aid that are dignified, that are in alignment with humanitarian principles that the United Nations, that other humanitarian organizations are accustomed with. And like previously, that's what was happening to a degree. But a lot of these food aid kitchens um, have completely run out of supplies, and they've ceased their operations over the past few weeks. And so none of them have been in operation now for weeks.
I think it's just so striking that I think a lot of people see the degree of devastation now and the degree of starvation now and forget that so much of this has been going on for so long. So I think
Mhm.
it's very striking to hear you describe children whose growth was stunted from caloric deficits due to a blockade that has been in place for so much longer than I think a lot of, people in the Western world are cognizant of. And I think that's our responsibility to educate ourselves on. Was there anything else when you were in Gaza, an experience specifically um, that stuck with you? Are you one that you're comfortable sharing?
I mean, I think just a lot of the interactions that I have were really profound, especially like the sharing of food.
Yeah.
Like we had many great conversations over food, and I remember being in the middle of a really busy clinic in the primary care medical point that I was working at, and one of the nurses handed me a bowl of hot lentil soup to kind of keep my energy up, and really gave like didn't take no for an answer. So it was really kind to kind of have these kinds of interactions. And I remember like in the evenings when we would like debrief about like the cases that we saw, or like like to kind of connect on a human level rather than just talk about medical cases. The Palestinian healthcare workers that we worked with, like they wanted to do so much more for us. They wanted to show us the beach, which we didn't get to see because we would be stuck on the medical compound, because somehow our lives, right, mattered more than local Palestinians. Um, and they wanted to show us their things, the things like their home in the north, for example, and actually properly cook for us. And so to we were dreaming of this world um, where Gaza would be rebuilt, and we would come back one day and share a meal with them, a meal that they cooked with the things that they gathered in the home that they cherish, with the people that they love, and we were dreaming of this like the next day after the genocide were to end. And and I think I'm not sure if a lot of folks are still dreaming about that. I know that there have been children that dream of actually dying with their family, for example, and not being the sole survivor. People dream of just having food now. So it feels really difficult for me to also like reminisce about some of these memories, knowing that um, it my energy should really go to the actions that are necessary to end the famine and to stop the genocide. But it's it it's kind of also indescribable. Like there's some things that happen in our life. For example, just like being here in Canada, sometimes like just going to work and work in the primary care clinic, like here, like some days just feel like every other day. And I would say the short time that I was there in Gaza, I was only there for a week. Um, uh, like there's so many things like every day that happen that really stick with me, and I think will stick with me for the rest of my life, just because of how profound people's humanity and generosity were, despite everything that they've been through. That they would scroll on their phones to show me the photos of like their past lives before the genocide, and they would show me people that they love, the things that they love doing. For example, like I learned that there was like a soccer tournament that was actually named after Rachel Corrie, the American activist that was killed by Israel. And this soccer tournament, and seeing all the photos from those days over the years, to see the things that they loved, and then they would kind of come across photos of neighbors, of friends, of family members, and they would just tell me, oh, this person was killed. This person was killed in this way. This person was killed with their family. And the way in which every single person has been touched by the genocide in Gaza in some way. Um, People are also, I think, really hungry for their stories and their narratives to be told, because um, with how Zionism has so thoroughly um, infiltrated uh, like Western colonial states in upholding that narrative of Zionism as a good thing in Palestine, when its material experience on the Palestinian indigenous land and body is genocide, is land grabs, is resource extraction, um, is apartheid and occupation. Um, to 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 see all of that and to know that is the reality, um, is yeah, there's so I mentioned that because I think because of the propaganda to uphold Zionism, people are so hungry to tell their narratives because it's not just a war against humanity itself, but it's a war of narratives. It's an attack on whose narratives are able to be told in this world without a degree of censorship, without a degree of twisting of words and experiences. Um, and so I think, and I also experienced that in the West Bank when I visited the West Bank um, a year before I visited Gaza. Um, and there's just so many stories that everyone holds in Palestine, and especially Palestinians in the diaspora, and and I feel so privileged to be able to hear those stories, and then obviously the responsibility is to act, is to not just dwell and feel sorry. No, it's not. Um, like sympathy or empathy. It's actually solidarity that what Palestinians deserve when they share these narratives with us.
I feel like also a big part of that is, you know, you feel the need to share these stories because we have placed this unfair burden on Palestinians that they have to be um, perfect victims, that they
Mhm,
have to be worthy of humanity. They have to, it's the immediate stripping of empathy for people being killed by Israel because, oh, well, they threw a pebble. Oh, well, they said from the river to the sea. It's just the the standard that Palestinians are forced to reach to get any basic humanity and
mhm,
sympathy, anything from Western media, Western governments, is so disproportionate. And it is unfair that a voice as valuable as yours has to spend your time on podcasts like mine telling these stories and justifying to the world why these people's lives have value. Why, even if, you know what, I think Palestinians who aren't kind deserve to live too.
absolutely.
Palestinians who are
Mhm,
selfish and greedy and flawed, they all deserve to live their lives in peace with their
mhm.
land, their family. And, you know, I just, it's a really deeply messed up situation. And Yipeng, I'm so grateful for you for coming on here and for doing this unfair work of spreading, telling these stories and trying to drag some humanity out of people listening.
The
I
world
really
is an
appreciate it.
the world is an unfair place,
It is.
and I'll just say, like I think a lot about like how much space do I take up, and like whether or not to speak about, speak at a certain thing or with a certain person about this issue, because I am non-Palestinian, and when and the ways in which my voice and my narrative has been highlighted, I think about how it's also, to a degree, an experience of anti-Palestinian racism,
It is, yeah.
where it has to be my experience that gets platformed when we have like so many Palestinian narratives in the diaspora in Palestine, who document and share what they experience, and this kind of Dehumanization has also played a significant role here, affecting Indigenous peoples, First Nations, Inuit, Métis, and
Yeah.
that's also been actually a huge catalyst for why I went into medicine and public health to begin with, and I've thought a lot about that too. Like, what is my role? What is my role as a non-Indigenous person working in this space of decolonizing healthcare? What does that mean? What does that look like? And the thing that I constantly land on is meaningful solidarity work, and who can really kind of gauge that is the people that you're organizing with and the people and the communities that are most affected by structural oppression. And so that let that be our compass always, is to recenter the people of Palestine, the people of Gaza who continue to face famine, to face starvation, to face genocide, bankrolled by our Canadian government.
Yipeng, thank you so much. I know I went a little over the time that you
Okay.
have today because you're getting ready to leave. So I don't want to. I have so many more things I want to ask you, but I don't want to be selfish and keep you any longer. So I just want to thank you so much and ask you, where can people follow you? Where can they keep up with the work that you're doing and the amplification that you're doing?
Yeah, thank you for having me, Rachel. I mean,
Of course,
I try to share updates on X, even though
it is what it is.
it is what it is. I mean,
Yeah,
it's yeah, a Nazi leads the company right now,
yeah.
and on Instagram, even though Meta, once again, awful, awful,
Tech platforms are all evil, so you just kind of have
just
to,
horribly evil,
use them consciously. Yeah.
and also
Um,
BlueSky as well. Yeah,
yeah.
I'm not super tech savvy to be on, anything other than that, but I'll try to learn some tricks to expand my social media repertoire. But I think people
I'll
also
teach you
forget that
anytime.
I think people forget that, like, I work in a clinic most of the time, and I'm like not on social media all the time. I have a day job. I do other work. I do other organizing and whatever. So, but I appreciate your coverage and
Of
your
course.
journalistic efforts that actually um, uphold a level of ethics and standards that am not seeing from a lot of other journalists these days.
No, thank you. That's really kind of you. And thank you for doing the work so that we have stories to tell and amplifying them. I think I speak for everyone listening to this when I say uh, we hope your march is incredibly successful and that, we'll be watching and standing in solidarity with you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Bubble Pop. I'm Rachel Gilmore, your least favorite person's least favorite journalist. If you enjoyed this episode, consider subscribing to Bubble Pop on YouTube, Patreon, Substack, or wherever you like to listen. You can also find me on TikTok, Instagram, Twitch, and BlueSky. I'd like to say a special thank you to Hans Vivian Wenzel for creating the incredibly groovy music for Bubble Pop. You can find more of his stuff on Spotify under the artist name Hans. That's a lowercase h with an exclamation mark. Thank you again for spending this time with me. The only reason I can tell these stories and do this for a living is because of your support. So thank you, and I'll see you next time.